And I got the biggest upgrade on my HVAC that you have ever seen in your life, because they ordered the unit to go to the store that my contractor is picking up and installing.
Mm-hmm.
They go to pick it up. It's not there. Like, they don't have it in stock. And the guy's like, hey, we're installing this now. So they said the only one they had there was their top of the line model. It was like worth 10,000 more. And they just gave it to us.
Wow.
It was awesome. So the efficiency went up, the size went up a little bit.
For this house that you're in now?
Yeah, it's awesome.
Everything always happens good for you, Lee.
No. I have the equal side of bad. Don't forget I fell down an elevator shaft. Don't forget.
What?
You know
yeah,
that.
but the good news was that there was like a bounce house at the bottom. So.
I have weird luck. It's not always good. It's strange luck.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to 3 Point Perspective, the podcast about illustration, how to do it, how to make a living at it, and how to make an impact in the world with your art. I'm Jake Parker.
I'm Lee White.
And I'm Will Terry, and all three of us are professional illustrators. And we've all been working for about the last 25 years. We work with just about every major publisher in the business. Together, we've published somewhere around 100 books, and we've all taught illustration at university.
Each week, we pick a different topic in illustration and battle it out on air for you. Each week, you are going to learn something fantastic, especially this week.
That's right.
Especially this week.
Because it's my topic.
That's right. Last week, just a quick update. Will talked about launching his Kickstarter, and again, this is
Back to the Future. So
Back to the Future again, right?
Yeah. So we're way out in the future, and the Kickstarter's ended.
But I just want to say you had a pretty stellar first couple days there, first 24 hours.
It was fun. Funding in 5 minutes was really fun.
Yeah.
So does that shoot you to the front page? Like, you're basically a darling project now?
We're right now we're featured on we're the top project under illustration and comics.
So in 24 hours, you got 1,200 backers, essentially.
Wow.
That's really good.
It's crazy.
Where do you think that scope came from? Is there one particular audience that seemed to be making the majority of that crowd up, or who's?
We were signing people up on our website to get to get noticed right when we went live with the Kickstarter, and it seemed like most of those signups came from my Instagram, my YouTube channel, Facebook, and Twitter. So
yeah,
very
so
cool.
those are your 1,000 true fans.
Yeah,
right there.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations, Will. You're
thank you.
Inspiration. We'll just see if you can stick the landing here.
The Kickstarter could have failed by now.
Yeah.
It could have been that someone made a copyright claim or something that came out of the woodworks, or maybe, I don't know. What else could we imagine of?
There could be another Will Terry that sues you for defamation or something like that.
With this year, there could have been something crazy in the news cycle that's completely unrelated to you. I
saw a meme. I saw some meme that said, because we're recording this on June 30th, but it said July is about to happen. Something about you ain't seen nothing yet.
Here we go.
But there could be an EMP. I was thinking that would be neat, because then
a what?
An EMP. That hits
electromagnetic pulse. Is that what that stands for?
Yeah, and wipes out. You've seen Ocean's
I don't like how comfortable you are with those 3 letters, that you just say it like that's a normal thing that people know.
Well,
about.
It could be. And
I've watched a lot of sci-fi.
That would
just bust out.
So maybe that fried the Kickstarter servers, and maybe they didn't have redundancy in other cities, and if they didn't, then, or maybe the other cities they had redundancy and got hit with the same attack, and my Kickstarter got froze where it is.
If you've talked to anybody who knows anything about the internet, short of all the electricity in the world going out, the internet is like backed up and backed up and backed up again. Like,
right.
You even if the whole eastern seaboard,
but my computer's down because it got nailed with that EMP, and my car won't work, and so I can't access the funding because my phone's out.
You should not be saying this out loud.
That is a problem.
I'm using a 2-way radio
Do you
Because I
remember?
I have it stored in a Faraday cage downstairs.
Mm-hmm.
So
You should store a computer down there
I
as
should.
well.
Then I'll be the only one on Earth.
Put a
with
laptop
computer.
in your lead lined safe. No, do you remember War of the Worlds with Tom Cruise?
Yeah.
Just watch that again.
Yeah, and how he was able to get a car because they had just replaced the alternator.
Right.
And I don't know how that works or even that's even possible, because I feel like if it could fry a car that wasn't started, it could fry an alternator that wasn't hooked up. But
don't go too deep there.
That's right. Hey, and also to the person or people who like to go on our YouTube channel and let everyone know when we stop the banter and where the podcast actually starts, this one's for you.
That's hilarious. No, that's so funny. Like so many videos that I watch, that'll be one of the top comments is, okay, video actually starts at 2:31.
Right.
Like,
That's helpful. People don't like listening to this part of our show.
But we get so many compliments on people that say they feel like they know us because they feel like they're hanging out with us, that we like to start out this way.
It would be weird if we just dove right into it like we're a news organization or something.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Anderson Cooper. And top of the news today, contracts. We've got new information about how a contract works for illustrators. Lee, Lee's our man on the street. You want to tell us?
Thank you, Jake. I'll take it from here. So this topic is mine. We do alternate our topics, and mine are always a little more watched and listened to than Will and Jake. So you guys are gonna love this. So I like to talk about where the topic came from. There's always a reason that kind of sparks an interest in something. And so this one was a couple weeks ago. I get a random email from a client in China, advertising agency in China, that wants to use some of my images from a book that I did 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And they want to use it. The end user is a luxury mall in China, and they want to use these images. And am I free to license these images? And how much will I make? Who owns the images and all that? And so, I run immediately to my contracts. I send Jake and Will an email too, talking about it, because it's just such a weird request. And,
right.
And so we're bouncing around in what's in the contract. And I thought, wow, this is a practical application for some of this weird language that's in a contract. And so I think that's where everybody comes to contracts. So the only time you really look at the contract is when you're signing it, and it's a little bit abstract. And I thought it'd be fun to go through the main items in a contract and then talk about real world applications and how it worked out in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
So you can get a context for it. So what happened with this one, just sum up this story. My agent actually, a lot of times a publisher and an artist will split additional uses for an image like this. If the mall needed 5 images, they'd pay us a certain amount, and me and the publisher would split it 50-50. My agent, that was a line through that item. And so I would get all of the licensing rights to those images. So I would never have thought to cross through that or even think about that, because if it's, it's just in there, it's standard, whatever. But he had the insight to cross through that line item. And so, for those of you guys who have contracts and images out there, you might want to check it and see what happens. We're going to go through all this stuff today, but that's kind of what sparked the interest here. And there's a lot of uses for illustration, both in the current job you're working on and then other jobs that come down the road. So just real quick, I don't want to do a really deep dive into the nuance of contracts, but there's basically 6 things that are in a contract. And we'll go through those here. And this is kind of the framework for some of the stories we're going to tell today. So the first one is who. Who are the people involved and who are the companies involved? That seems like an easy one, but that needs to be listed out. And you guys feel free to jump in too if you want to. But the second item I came up with is what, and that is the details of the project. How many illustrations is it going to be? Where's it going to go? Any other kind of project details needs to be very specifically outlined in the contract. The dates, the when. When is the project due? When are different segments of the project due? When does payment happen? you need the dates on there, and very specific dates. How much? That just means how much you're going to be paid, and how's that going to be broken up. Ownership, who owns the work? How are the rights? Who has the rights? That was kind of what I was talking about a second ago. And lastly, it'll just be the details and a couple little miscellaneous things that happen at the end, like when things go wrong, arbitration, things like that. Do you guys agree with that? Is that kind of what you're seeing in your contract as an overview?
Yeah, you really want to make sure that you answer as many questions as you could possibly have in the beginning, because as you dig into the project, those questions are going to come up. And the worst thing you can do is start to work on something when you don't have answers.
Mm-hmm.
When you leave things out, just assuming, because it's in your mind, you're thinking, when you're beginning, you think, well, it's easier. This is probably what they want, or this is probably the way it's going to go.
Yeah, it's easy to just sort of look the other way and sign it. I mean, that's how most artists think. We don't want to dive into that language. It's written so obscure. I
have an anecdotal story to go along with this. When I was first starting out, I really wanted to get into children's books. And I'm not going to name the publisher because it wouldn't be fair to them. They're a smaller one. And I met them. I met the art director at an ALA conference in LA. And I had talked to them before, and like 2 weeks after I got home, they said, "Hey, we're interested in you for this manuscript. We'll be sending it over, and we're really sure that it seemed really sure that it was going to go through, but they were like, we'll have your contract in a couple weeks, so just look it over, blah blah blah." And then I called like a week later, and it was still kind of going, but I still didn't have the contract, and I asked questions about the art, and they said, "Yeah, I think they answered questions and stuff."
Mm-hmm.
They never said don't start on it, but I was so excited and anxious that I just
totally natural move, I think, to do that.
Sketched it all out. And it was short stories, so it was really fun because every illustration was a one-off.
Right.
So there were like 10 short stories.
Well, especially if if you've got nothing else to work on.
Right, which I didn't.
And you want to get ahead on projects. Yeah, why wouldn't you?
You already know the end of this story.
Keep going.
Everyone listening already knows it fell through. It didn't. It got canceled. It didn't happen. And I sent in the embarrassing thing is I sent sketches in. I sent sketches. I said these are just my initial thoughts and everything. And the designer was like, Why
are you doing this?
We haven't even green-lighted this thing yet.
Embarrassing.
Completely. Like, what are you doing? Kind of like, oh my gosh, we don't have a contract for you.
Oh man, I would have followed up and just said, "Hey, these are just some samples. Hope you like them. Bye."
Yeah, it was really awkward for the designer, and I don't fault them at all. At first, I was like, "Why?" It was kind of like, if you're interested in dating someone, right? It's that whole, why'd you show so much interest? Like the way you kissed me, the way you looked at me, and the way we held hands and everything. It was like, that's how I felt.
Way too forward.
Right. Yeah. Too much. Well, I'm glad you actually brought that up, because that was my first topic, is before getting the contract. And I mean, this is a weird issue for a lot of especially new illustrators. Should you work without a contract? What conditions are those? And sometimes what you just said, I think, happens to a lot of people, myself included. Even now, like, I'll start work and I'm emailing my agent like, "Hey, there's no contract here." I mean, I assume with the people that are involved at this stage that I'm going to get a contract, but it makes me really, really nervous. I will highlight a little story here of when working without a contract goes wrong. And I guess to lead into that is you should always have a contract before you start working with anyone, even your friends, even your grandma. Get a contract and you outline those 6 things: who, what, when, how much, ownership, and the details. Just write those things out and sign them. What happened here is I was struggling writing a story. I had an idea for a story, but I was struggling to write it. I've told this story, I think, in little bits and pieces on this podcast before, but I'll sum it up here. and I'm struggling writing it. So I contacted a writer that I had worked with and I was friends with, and said, hey, do you want to work on this story together? She said, yeah, I mean, we're friends. And of course, she's a professional and she's great. I respect her a lot. And she was into it. And so we started writing and bouncing ideas back and forth and doing different stuff. And the problem is we didn't do that second stage of the project, which is, what are the details of this project? She thought it was going to be one thing and took a lot more ownership than I wanted her to have in it. And I thought it was something different. I thought she's just helping out. And we never established what the partnership was between us doing this. We didn't talk about how the credits were going to be divvied up, who's going to get the writer credit if this thing goes out. I mean, there was so many details after the fact that came down that where I wanted to split from the project and take it my own direction. She did not want that, and lawyers got involved, and my agent. I mean, it turned my life upside down for a little while. And this is somebody who was my friend, and she absolutely, we're completely split now. I mean, like, we don't talk. No, all Facebooks and everything's been blocked. It was a disaster, and it's because we didn't establish any of it, and it never was worked through. It was too big of an issue to get through. And the story also got killed. Now there's all this baggage with the story. My agent doesn't want it because there's just too much baggage with it. And we just never established what those, it would have been so easy in the beginning to say, hey, just to outline, hey, I'm just looking for a little help. Here's how it's going to go down here. And she could say, oh, I'm not interested in that. But if you want to do it like this, we could just talk about it. But now I won't even discuss story ideas in a crit group. I've talked about that a little bit on the podcast, but I don't feel comfortable because what if somebody says something and now they think they own whatever they suggested? I run with their idea, and I just like to have it laid out. And a contract to me is, here's what everybody's thinking. It's not like, hey, you don't trust me, so you're making me sign a contract. It's, hey, are we all agreeing on these terms kind of thing? And so it's a little bit of a shift, because early in your career, did you guys think that, like, oh, if somebody might think that I don't trust them, or they, if you make them sign a contract?
I used to feel like, oh, that's just a, contracts are for, it's kind of like a prenup. Like, you wouldn't, it sort of seems like if you trust the person you're marrying, you wouldn't have to go into all this, who gets the kids and who gets the house and who gets the Porsche and who gets the beach house and all that stuff. But now I look at it more as like exactly what you said. Here's where my duties start and stop. Here's where your duties start and stop, and here's where they overlap. And it's just all very clear, and it makes you a little bit more confident that you're going into this doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it can put everybody at ease, because then you know what the parameters are, and it brings up stuff. You don't have to get in an argument if there's something you disagree with. And so I say, get a contract. Do you guys agree with that? Get a contract under any circumstance of working with somebody.
Even if your contract is emails back and forth, it's a record. Because it's having something typed out that's archived, that you can go back to and look at. I'm not saying that emails are superior. I'm saying at least
it's a trail. It's a trail.
But going back to what you were saying about you won't even share story ideas, which totally makes sense, because if they're an idea, they're just out there and floating around, right? I mean, but at what point will you in a critique group share does it have to be written in story form?
I don't know. I mean, it's a good question. I haven't had to deal with it lately because I've been doing other projects and stuff like that. But now that I'm getting back into my own projects and writing, I need to think about what that means. I haven't really parsed it. I'm like, I don't know. I just got so burned with this one that
I
now
think
I'm
you
gun
got
shy.
really unlucky. I think this, because I know the person and I know the story, and I think that you just got really unlucky with that person.
Probably.
Like, I think most people aren't like that.
You're probably right.
I'm not saying that it couldn't happen again, but I think we tend to, it's funny, we make life decisions based on our own personal anecdotes, right?
Right.
Which isn't always the best way to make policy.
Right. Right.
Right. Yeah. You guys have any other stories about not having a contract? Did you ever get burned, Jake? You always have a contract?
Not that I could think of off the top of my head. And even as you sent us the notes for this, I was thinking, I've been pretty lucky in that the big projects that I've done have all had contracts, and the times where I haven't used a contract, it all just kind of worked out.
Yeah.
So
Me too.
So, but that said, I've seen it with you. I've seen it with other instances where I'm like, that's sort of standard operation. It has been standard operation for my career.
I had one just last month with a small game company.
Mm-hmm.
And I had mentioned, I think on the podcast too, we was looking at doing this board game, and the art director, I guess she was art director / owner. It's a small company, but they've done a lot of games, and they had a lot of nice titles out on their website. But so I had confidence going, well, they do make games, and my quote was too high, so it ended up falling apart that way. But when we couldn't agree on a price, I had done some test images, and I had, in our back and forth emails, I said, well, because I don't want to do test images for free. So I said, how about X amount of dollars? If the project doesn't go forward, that will be subtracted from the total. If it goes forward, in other words, I'll eat these for free if the project goes forward. But if it doesn't, this is what you owe me. And it was clearly there in the email. And the woman writes back when I said, okay, so, because we couldn't work out a price. She couldn't come up to where I needed to be, and I wasn't willing to go down to where she wanted to be. And so I said, that's fine. Sorry, it's not going to work out, but how about that kill fee or the test fee, And she pulled I don't remember us ever talking about that.
Oh man.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. In fact, I'll get while we're talking, I'll get the email and read you exactly what she wrote, but it was something to that effect. And I had to go back in the email trail and just show her, and to her credit, as soon as I did that, she was like, okay. And the check came literally in about 10 days.
But still, it made it awkward.
It made it awkward. Yeah. It was not fun to have to do that. To it's never fun to have to prove someone wrong. Unless it proves you wrong.
Isn't it?
It's fun. Which I do all the time. And so that's super.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I know what the reaction's going to be. And so I wanted to tell a little bit different story before we even dive into the contract stuff. What's going to happen is everybody's going to be like, oh, I need to be on the lookout for all this stuff, right? That's the natural reaction. And I want to tell a cautionary tale there. This is a good one. I had an art director come speak for my portfolio class when I was teaching in Portland. And he gave me this story. It's so good. We were talking about contracts that day. And so he was the art director for Sony Online, and he was the art director for some Nickelodeon stuff. And he was in charge of development. And so they had contacted these kids. I mean, they're like 18 years old or whatever, had done a little animated short. And when he was programming for Nickelodeon, they bring a bunch of people who have done shorts in, and they have them do a pilot episode or a test, further the tests along or whatever, and then maybe it'll get made into a show. Well, they were really jazzed about this animated short, the Nickelodeon people, and super jazzed about it. They bring the kids in. The kids don't know what they're doing, so they lawyer up immediately, probably using one of their dad's, high powered lawyers or whatever. They lawyer up, and just trying to get this pilot episode made. Because remember, they're not saying, hey, here's 5 seasons of SpongeBob or something. They're saying, hey, this we like what it is. Maybe we're going to make it into something. And they lawyered up, and they went through in excruciating detail. What if a character ends up getting made into a theme park ride? And they ended up hashing out so many provisions to try to cover their massive success that's going to happen in their eyes, that it got so complicated that Nickelodeon said, we'll just go with these over here, never mind. And they were done.
That's interesting, because I've heard on the flip side, I had a friend who his project got optioned by Disney, and their whole thing was the whole legal side of it was Disney makes sure that they own every iteration of what this could possibly be. And essentially, if you want to, battle back and forth on this, it again is going to be like, we've got 1,000 people behind you that we could, that are willing to work with us. And so, I think what you can do in those situations, and even in my own publishing contracts, is outline what percentage of all this stuff that you can, that is on the table and is room for negotiation, and try to get what you can, because it's all there, it's all available, it's and it's
But
all,
do you think your position comes into play there too? I mean, going against a big company like that, and you're saying I want the theme park rights or some other plushie doll rights, and you have literally no resume. I think I would, if it was me, I would be willing to sacrifice those things on the first project, because think about it, you got an animated series now on Nickelodeon or Disney or whatever, and all of a sudden now you have such a strong stance for your next couple projects. Hopefully that's not the only project that you've thought about, and it gets you into the industry, you meet all these people. I mean, think about the doors that open. It's not a favorable contract by far. I'm not saying that that's a good deal to just suck it up. I would have sucked it up though. I would have said, you want to make a pilot? And let's make the pilot. I don't really care that much.
Yeah, I think you get in there and you see what's possible, and I wouldn't be like I wouldn't be shy about just seeing what is possible and what is, where there's room for you to get something. And honestly, that's why I don't do a lot of my negotiations myself. I use an agent, because she just knows so much more about this stuff. She's seen what's gone wrong. She's seen what's gone right.
Right.
And she knows what she can get and what she can't get. And so that's sort of my advice on just overall with all this stuff, is you need to know what's in your contracts as a creator, but you don't necessarily have to be the person negotiating or being on that side of it. You can hire someone to do that. And
that's what I do like that about the agents, because then they go to the battle for you, and then you're not left with this awkward thing after you've gone back and forth, 5 or 6 times yelling at each other about what you're going to take and get and all that. That's an awkward position for an illustrator to be in, to then have to work with the client after that. You know what I mean? And so I like the agent going in, being basically good cop, bad cop. You're just on the side. I just like to draw, and you're holding your pencil. Yeah. Let them go to battle for you.
Essentially. And I would love to talk to an editor or, whoever deals with the contract side of things, and just see it from their perspective. If if they know which agents play hardball and which ones don't, and if any of that bleeds over into the project, if it is an intense negotiation, if it affects the project at all, I don't know. It'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I'd love to know that too. All right, let's go dive into my points. And we got stories I actually posted on Facebook yesterday and our forum as well. This podcast is sponsored by SVSLearn.com, by the way, and we have got a huge number of people that are on the forums chatting every day. So I put this question to them too. So I've got some stories from other people as well. So I don't think there's any issue around the first topic, which is who, like listing out the people and the companies. Well, only thing I'll say there is you just pay attention to who the end company is. Like I wouldn't do work for a cigarette company. That's just me personally. If it said, one's on the contract, it's going to be RJ Reynolds. You just got to pay attention there. I can't think of any other circumstance where something would come up on who the
other thing
is.
Too, and this might be not what you want to talk about, but I made an LLC for my illustration business, and so the contract is always in the LLC's name. So It's Jake P.
Explain why you do that and what's the benefits there.
So there's partially some tax reasons in that LLC is protected and removed from me personally as far as liability and certain tax things. And essentially what happens is they're doing business with the entity, and not with Jake Parker. So my business can declare bankruptcy if it needs to, but it
doesn't affect you personally,
that,
right?
Mhm.
Or my business can get sued, but I don't personally get sued. And so that's just it's been the way that I've been doing it for 10 years or so. I can't remember when it happened, but it's every once in a while I'll get a contract and they'll be like, oh, well, we want to work directly with you. And it's usually like some sort of freelance where they want to hire me on as an employee for a time being while I work on this project.
Oh,
I guess for their tax reasons, and they can't hire on a company. But outside of that, everyone else wants to work with, is fine working with.
It's interesting. I didn't think there would be anything to say under that line item. And then now there's this whole thing. Maybe I should switch to so LLC means limited liability company.
Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. I need to think about that.
So wait, you do business as Lee White?
Mm-hmm. Lee White Illustration, but I'm a sole proprietor. And so it just is Lee White Illustration.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, getting an LLC is relatively, it's affordable. One illustration job could probably pay for 2 LLCs. I don't know,
right.
Like one single illustration. I just remember it being super painless, and it was, it felt official. Like it felt like I had an actual business because I do, but it made it feel like I was a little bit more legitimate.
Right.
And
I like seeing letters after a company too. It does make you look official.
Well,
I always write Lee White MD after mine's my fake medical degree.
Right. Esquire. There's some psychology there too, because I think if you feel more professional, you're going to act more professional, and when you act more professional, people will treat you more professional, and when you're treated more professional, I think you end up making more money and getting better jobs. And
I think that goes back to the agent thing too. You guys remember when you first got an agent, how much fun it was to say my agent?
Yeah.
I need to pass this off to my agent and see what they say.
Yeah, I just got off the phone with my agent. I'm talking projects. No big deal.
My agent, call your agent. It's serious. Yeah. It was such a thrill to say that originally, but I do think it adds some legitimacy to you, like you were saying, and then the fees can go up because you look legit. It doesn't look like you're just somebody doing it at home in your basement or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. My first studio was in my basement. I liked it. So if anybody has a problem with what we say, write to Will Terry.
I'm actually thinking of moving into the basement.
Are you?
Studio. Yeah.
I like the basement. It stays, the temperature is easy to regulate. Yeah.
My kids are all gone and it's a big space down there. And so I'm like, maybe
I've worked in the basement. I've worked at the kitchen table. I've worked at the dining room table.
Well, what's funny is, and people that are on our YouTube channel are notice that I have this crappy background right now, where I had the best background of all of us. You have to admit.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
I was rocking it, and I felt better than you guys. I felt like I was
makes
worth
you feel
more,
good.
and now I feel like I'm less. And
now you have a big air conditioner hose behind you.
I do. So I'm thinking I need to up my game there.
I know a really good therapist, Will. It's going to help you.
Well, it's funny, but we've kind of decided to let that studio space go down there because we just don't need it. We're online and we all work from 3 different cities, and
yeah, it's interesting how we had the studio space.
It was cool. It was like a clubhouse. Lee decided
it really
not
was
to move
cool. It was the other. It also.
Wait, did you see my next space though?
But it was full too. Like there was 2 or 3 people working there besides you and me.
Mhm.
And then I moved, Aaron moved, Tanner got a job somewhere else.
The common denominator was everybody getting away from Will.
And now it's Daniel there. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Will.
Now, my favorite, this is a little side note, but my favorite story with the studio, obviously I wasn't there daily, but I loved it when I came there and we shot those videos.
Mhm.
We got a bunch of teachers to come in and we set up the whole thing as a kind of film studio, shot all these videos. It was really fun.
Yeah.
This is the reminiscence part of the show here.
No, we need music for this. Some light piano music.
I think it was my Kipper snacks is why you guys moved out.
And it was an element of it. No.
All right, moving forward. People are turning off.
They're hitting
our
the fast forward 30
fast
seconds.
forward. All right, so step 2. It's the what of the project. What details does the project include? How many illustrations does it include? Just all the stuff that goes along with what you're actually being hired for.
Mhm.
I'll start out. I'm sure you guys have stories for this, but I had an interesting one that utilizes this little clause here to a T. I did a book a number of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, called I Lived on Butterfly Hill. Probably shouldn't even say the names of these things because then the clients that go with them, but whatever. It's already out there. I lived on Butterfly Hill. It was a great story. I loved the writing. I was contracted to do, I think, 22 illustrations. I did the cover, and this was like a novel, chapter book. And so I was contracted to do 22 illustrations, and I just loved the writing. I thought it was really good. I had a couple of projects get pushed back that I was working on at the same time, so all of a sudden I had a little more time. And I liked the subject matter so much, I just threw in an additional 25 or so illustrations. I did 53 total illustrations. That includes chapter heads and spots, and then a couple of full page and then full spread. So I did all this extra work, and I didn't even ask for anything. It was fine because I really liked the project, and that book won an award, which is really cool, an ALA award. And a couple of years pass. All of a sudden, there's a second book. It's the one that's coming out next year called Return to Butterfly Hill. Just got through illustrating it, but same contract, sort of like, we've gone up a little bit in price because times have changed, but
Right.
The contract was essentially the same, 22 illustrations. But the first book now has 53 illustrations. So it created this really awkward moment. They were like, hey, we loved what you did with the first one. Go ahead and do the second one. And I was like, nah. If I don't mind doing that much work, but I do want to be paid for those. And I do want to point out, they never were balking on paying. I just did those. They didn't even think about it. It never came up. So I don't want to act like my client didn't want to pay for it. But on this round, I had to be specific. Like, you guys are asking for 22. The first one had 53. So what do we do here? And it just was some awkward back and forth because I just did all this work without putting it in the contract, without even mentioning it. And so it just took a whole round of emails, and they eventually came back and said, no, we're only going to do the 22 or 23, and that's what I had to stick with. But it just made me look a little, I thought, unprofessional because I did all this without it being included in the project scope. So project scope can happen on 2 different ways. Projects change. Either the client changes it or the illustrator changes it. Most of the time, the client changes it, and that's what you want to be looking out for. But in this case, I changed it, and then caused all this awkwardness later. We worked it out. It was fine. And I really do like the work and the book. But
basically this podcast episode is going to be passed around in agent circles for why you should not work with Lee.
That's true. I'm going to start saying a friend told me this story.
A friend of mine.
I'm not going to use me. These first couple are just happen to be me, but I don't mind throwing it out there because it's just stuff you don't think about. You get excited about something. Hey, I'm going to do this other thing, and the client's happy, and all of a sudden down the road, it just creates a weird contract moment, and that's what we want to talk about. Do you guys have? I've got another story, but I want to pass it around too. That's the opposite of that.
As far as what is worked on,
the scope of the project,
scope of the project.
Here's what we're doing. Here's what we're asking for.
That's super important. And I the only thing I could say, I had a cover that I did one time where it was, and this is an example of where the contract really helped me out. because I had to work on this cover, design it. I did all these like preliminary sketches for it. We narrowed it down to one or two. I polished those up. We narrowed it down to one. And then it was round after round after round of notes after this department had seen it, after this editor had seen it, after they showed it to this art director, to the point where it was sort of unrecognizable from from the initial thing. And I just wasn't, I don't know. They were polite and said, we changed sort of the vision of what we wanted for this. And I eventually saw the actual cover, and it was a completely 180 from what I was doing. So, and I don't know if it was they just didn't like the work I was making, but I was really doing everything they told me to do. I did all this work, and ultimately they said, we're not going to use your cover, and we're going to move on. We're going to do something else. But I still got paid for it, and I still got paid for all that work. Because in the contract it said, there was like, I guess this goes more for when things go wrong.
I've got that listed at the end. Like basically, you're talking about a kill fee.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. Except if I recall, it wasn't. So a kill fee is usually less than the full fee, right? Like,
not if you've already done final art.
Okay, right. So I guess if they kill it halfway through, you get half, right, whatever the contract says. But this one, I still got paid for the work, which was fine. The only bummer is you also, when you put that much work into a cover, you're getting paid for it, and the pay is fair, but an added bonus to working on covers or working in children's books or anything where your name is directly attached to it is it's a calling card for another job. And right. So to put all that work into something that no one is ever going to see, it's kind of frustrating because it's just a portfolio piece you never get to like share.
I would think that happens a lot that feeling happens a lot in concept art, where you do like a really good segment for a film and it gets cut, or a character gets cut or whatever. That'd be rough. That doesn't really happen too much in illustration.
No, not too much, but yeah, in that's why I kind of stopped doing a lot of like concept artwork for commercials and stuff like that. It's because you do all this great, beautiful art, and the commercial comes out, 6 months later or whatever, and you could, I guess, share that art on your website, but everybody who sees the commercial has no idea that you did art for it, right?
It's anonymous. So yeah,
it's completely anonymous. The only people who know you did art for it are people who somehow find your website or see your Instagram post when you can share that. And sometimes, in the contract, it might say that you can't ever share the art for it. I've had some of that too, where it's sort of on permanent non-disclosure.
Oh, that would be frustrating.
Yeah, it's frustrating, but usually the pay makes up for those sometimes.
While you're driving around in your Lamborghini, just thinking about that art that's in a flat file somewhere. You gotta...
Yeah, I got an anecdotal little snippet to put in there. I did this job, and I'm curious as to what you guys would have done. I call it my Tropic Thunder moment.
No.
Ready.
I'm just thinking the Ben Stiller character. Okay, go ahead.
So working for Merck, the pharmaceutical company, about 4 or 5 years ago, and
always good to list the client's name specifically.
It had nothing to do with Merck. It had nothing to do with the client because it was through an ad agency, and the project was a children's book for kids who get rheumatoid arthritis, like rheumatoid. It's not the way to say it. Anyway, arthropathies, I think is how you say it. Wow. Anyway,
did not know that.
Yeah, so it was for the drug Enbrel, and it was basically a little children's book that's like, hey, you're sick, but it's going to be okay because you're going to get this drug, and it's like a superhero that's fighting in your body, kind of a thing. And so there were some fun illustrations. but overall, it was really heavy-handedly art directed. But here's the kicker that happened with the scope was there were 2 designers that were working on it, and then there was the owner of the company, and it happened over a summer, and both of those designers ended up going on vacation, and they both didn't quite. There were balls being dropped during the time period to where I was confusing. I never got a complete layout. We bid on the job, and it was about a $63,000 job. So it was a great paying job, but the work was horrible. I mean, just with like as far as doing a children's book, it wasn't done. It wasn't handled. It's hard
because
to describe.
You weren't working with people who had ever done a children's book before.
That's right. And
you weren't working
also
with an editor, an art director. You were working with essentially like a marketing team, right?
Right. And so they're taking my hands. Basically, I felt like a marionette being,
they're guiding all of it, right?
Yeah.
Did you ever see that? There's an image going around where there's a person holding a mouse with their finger on the button, and then there's a hand on top of that hand with the finger on top of their finger. And it said that, in the bottom hand, this is the designer, and the top hand, this is the client.
Awesome.
Pretty much. So
it's essentially what was happening to you. I remember because I was sitting across from you during this whole thing.
Yeah, and you helped me with it a little bit. You helped me design a couple of the characters.
Well, and I was jealous of what you're getting paid for it too, but not at the end.
Well, and so what happened was they threw in at the end. I was like, the deadline was coming, and they're like, we need these 2 extra pieces of art, but they didn't say they were extra. They were like, they just kind of crept them into the and I'm counting up everything, and I'm like, these are extra. This is not what we originally bid on. And I'm going through it. Went through my agent, and I'm working with him, and I'm like, hey, they're throwing extra stuff, and he's like, I'll work with them. And so the Tropic Thunder moment was when it finally got down to the wire where it was due the next week, and there were still 3 or 4 pieces of art that needed to be done. And I'm telling him, well, then I don't have time. Like it was kind of like I'll do them, and I'm telling my agent I'll do them, but I don't want to do them under the deadline. They need to give me more time. And so then the Tom Cruise character, the real jerk producer, he's like the owner, gets on the phone, and he's like, you will do it. You'll do it on time. Yeah. And I don't want to hear anything. Like, he's just telling me, and I'm like, and my agent, and I remember, because he's a very strong personality himself, calls me, and he says, Will, keep your eye on the prize. Let's just get in and get out. Now, he had $15,000 at least on the line. So of course he doesn't want me to screw it up, because he's getting 25%.
Like,
so
Will,
he's like,
I need
Will,
this money.
He's like massaging my shoulders over the phone. Just do it, man. Just take it. Just don't, and I'm like, this guy's a jerk. He's like, he's like,
I know he's a jerk, Will.
Don't ruin the whole thing. Yeah. So what would you guys do in that situation? I mean, like, you're getting paid. It was the highest paid job I'd ever had for
something like that
job. I had been paid more per hour for different things, but this was, as far as like one project, it was the highest.
This is a project. Healthy 5 figures.
I like the optimistic, happy approach of offering the new contract. The language that I use for that is, hey, it looks like this project has grown. I am so excited. I can't wait to do the work. Let me just, let's just drop a contract for X number of new illustrations, and I'll be happy to get started on that.
So then I forgot to tell you the other part is that the 2 designers lied. And they had told the owner, the Tom Cruise character, that they had told us the whole scope in the beginning.
Yeah, but if it's not written down.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a mess.
So did you do it?
Yeah, I did it, and I got
sometimes
paid.
you just got to suck it up and do it.
And
you don't want to be crazy and ask for. I mean, sometimes there's like a quick little favor a designer will ask of you. I just did this book cover a week ago or 2 weeks ago that a dog is one of the main characters, and they asked me to just do a quick silhouette that they're going to use in the type treatment. I didn't write up a new contract for that. I don't, it's just throw it in. I don't care. So you don't want to be crazy about it, but a lot of times, I mean, I want to go through with some cautionary tales, I guess, for each of these bullet points that we're hitting, so you know what to look for, so our listeners know what to look for. And project creep, where your project starts to snowball, is the main thing to look for, because it happens a lot. I had a student who was a senior getting ready to graduate and got hired by a video game company, and they had contracted her to do just a series of assets, say five assets or something. I can't remember what the actual number was, but 4 or 5, whatever. And she turned these assets in, and they loved her work. And so they started saying, hey, can you design this bigger prop, a vehicle? And then it's creeped into, can you design this room, an interior, and then an interior, an exterior layout, and then full environments and key paintings. And none of that was in the contract. And she wasn't billing in cycles, which we'll talk about in a few minutes of when you get paid, but she wasn't billing in cycles. So by the end of this thing, what started out as 4 or 5 things for, $250 had turned into months and hundreds of assets and stuff. And now she has to send in this giant invoice. And they resisted, of course, because all of a sudden now they got sticker shock. They didn't know, they didn't keep track of it either. And it was just a nightmare. And she felt really bad. She was crying and stuff. She'd done all this work, and she wanted to get paid, obviously, for all of it. It was just a mess, and trying to sort through it was messy for them. It was messy for her. It would have been better just to say, hey, we've knocked out those original assets. I'm so happy to do these new ones. Remember, keep the optimistic approach. Let's write up a new contract for these.
Yeah.
That's the language that I like.
Yeah. Yeah. And at any time, if you do have an agent, anytime you can just call your agent and say, hey, I just got off the phone with, the art director. They're wanting this. I feel a little bit like I'm getting taken advantage of. Can you just poke your head in over there and see what's going on, and see if everything's,
with the agent, all this stuff is
be
easier, but I'm just thinking of the people who don't have the agents, the new illustrators, and don't know what you don't want to. The thing is, you never want to let down the client. And I remember that feeling, like any pushback from you think you're going to let down your client. You guys remember that? Like if you challenge them on anything, whether it's creativity or contract issues or whatever. And so you just don't want to let them down. I just remember really just wanting them to be happy with me, and no matter what they were asking for, So, so just watch out for it, because it happens quickly. It starts to blend into revisions, and I didn't know whether that would be included in the project scope or not, because sometimes something is a revision, and other times it's actually a new thing that needs to be renegotiated. Do you guys have a filter for when something goes from a revision to being something new, or how does that work?
Yeah, so a revision, and does this have to be in the contract? Maybe it should be, huh?
Well, I do have revisions. We'll talk about revisions as its own thing in a second, because that, out of all the responses I got on Facebook and the forum, the revisions was the main thing, because revisions change the whole nature of the project depending on who the client is.
Yeah, but here's the thing: is you could sort of stave off a ton of revisions if you just are always showing your process. If you're like staying, keeping them informed, like, okay, here's my pencils, here's I finished a page, this is how I'm going to do the rest of it. And I think for me, a revision is, the color is a little off on this page or on all these pages compared to, these pages over here. And we just would like consistency in color. Right. And what was the revision, and what was the other?
Basically going to a new thing, a new line item, or just morphs into
right. But if they're like, hey, the we just heard from the author, and they're like, hey, can you make the main character a pig instead of a dog? that is not going to fly. That's a major,
because you couldn't have possibly satisfied them on the first go around.
Right.
Right.
They
When it changes
started
so
you over.
drastically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the test I always see is I go back to the original project scope and say, it can be like a character, like Jake says, if it was originally an elephant and now it's a rabbit, well, that's a new asset. Hey, let's do a new contract for this. But it can also be emotional tones too. Like if the original thing is this sad little boy and all of a sudden he's same character, but now he's supposed to be really happy. That could change the whole nature of it. It just changes the project brief. So I always go back to that main brief and say, hey, this is a little bit different than what we agreed on. Let's write up something new or an addendum or something like that.
I'll give you a specific example I got. This last children's book I did, everything got turned in, finished illustrations. They came back to me and said, hey, we've been showing this around. We showed it to I guess they show librarians who are like sort of trusted I don't know, consultants or whatnot. And a couple of them came back and said, hey, this one illustration that you did is a little bit insensitive to people with disabilities. And can you come up with a better solution? And what I illustrated was a superhero lifting up a person in a wheelchair to grab a book off the top shelf. And if you have a disability, specifically a wheelchair one, you a lot of times, from what I understood from this conversation, is that you don't want to feel, you don't want to be put in situations where you're looked at as, I guess, disadvantaged. I could be murdering it, but basically, if you can get a book yourself, or if you can do something yourself, someone shouldn't do it for you because it shows you as being less able than what you actually are, something like that. Anyways, so my illustration clearly wasn't cutting it for certain people. And they said, can you just redo this illustration? It was like a third of a page. And at first I was like, oh man, I got to go back and start from scratch, come up with something new, and there's no way around it. And then I realized this is an opportunity to make the book that much better. And what I ended up replacing it with was an illustration that I thought was, 100 times better than what was originally there. And so in that case, I was really grateful for the revision, even though it was a pretty hardy one. And I felt like it wasn't something that I needed to go back and ask for more money for, even though I could have probably have said, hey, but at the end of the day, with a lot of these book projects, my name is on the cover. I want the book to succeed, and I kind of sometimes just take one for the team because I really want it to be successful, and I want to be known as a guy who's easy to work with.
Do you guys have a revisions clause? So the clause that I've seen on some contracts is I'll do X number of revisions, let's say 2 revisions on an original concept that are true revisions. And then after that, I bill at $150 an hour. And from what I've heard, when people do say that, hey, we're past the second revision, I'd be happy to make this change. Remember, you want to be happy. But the billing starts at $150 an hour. And then the client says, oh, no, we're good. We're good with that second one. They don't want to pay anymore. What do you guys think about that?
I think
putting that in there.
That's smart.
Yeah.
I would do it.
You guys ever have any?
Doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good clause. I mean, it's something that's fair, like 2 revisions. After that, I feel like the client starts being a little crazy. Either that, or you're really missing the mark. But I don't know many illustrators who would miss after three versions.
The thing is, the longer you go in your life, the older you get, the more you become skilled at avoiding problems. Right?
Yeah, it's
you
true.
just learn how to avoid problems. And so the way that I've learned to avoid this specific problem is I understand that at almost every client that you work for, you're dealing with mostly one person, and they work directly with a committee or a group.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just say to that person, if it's an art director or an editor, I want to send you these horribly rough sketches. When I say horribly rough, I mean please don't get scared. You've seen my work.
Yeah.
Right. It's not going to be a stick figure in the final.
Right. But I just don't want to waste time going down the wrong road.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, I don't want to do revisions. A lot of them.
Right.
So help me help you, help me understand visually what we're dealing with here as far as a layout. So here's a really rough, ugly, and it took a long time to be able to get the confidence to do that. But man, does it save.
I do that too. And we talked about that a couple of times on the podcast where I include a lot of reference pictures. Like, is this sort of the scene? Is this the mood that you're looking for? It's just a picture, you know what I mean? Or something, or still from a movie. And they say, oh, that's it. Or no, like, no, we don't want to do that. And man, you eliminate so many hours of work just doing that preliminary. I think they appreciate it too. I mean, it gets everybody on the same page really quick.
Yep.
Yeah, I love
please
that.
don't show the committee this. This is for your eyes only.
You guys ever turn down a revision where they ask for something, you say no?
I've done, there's been times where I push back, where I'm like, I could do X and Y, but I can't do Z. Sorry.
I will say there's a technique for that. Oh, go ahead, Jake. Sorry.
Well, I'll couch it with being reasonable on a couple other things.
If I'm going to push back, I always say here. I never say, no, I'm not going to do it. I say, the reason I'd like to keep it as is, or whatever the language is there, is because of these reasons. It fits the story because of this, and I don't want to do it that other way you're suggesting because of this. And I try to lay out some reasons, not just like, no, I don't want to do it.
Right.
You know?
Right.
I will say I have a friend who one time worked for an ad agency, a friend who was working for a design firm who was the end client was Apple. And I was asked to do these my friend was asked to do these icons, and they went through round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. And then like after like 5 rounds of it, I was making like my friend was making $350 or something on these icons. And then there's like, let's just go back to the drawing board. Let's start over. And this was not Apple. No. This is just an insane designer. And after going through that over and over, and I've been working on it for weeks, I said that finally she said, hey, let's go back and let's start over. And my friend sent her the note that said, hey, I'm going to send you the layered files. Knock yourself out. Do whatever you want to do. And that's it.
And I am done.
Yep, that's my friend. That wasn't me.
Yes, I'm sure. I'm sure it was. That's hilarious.
All right. Okay, so let's move on. Occasionally, you got to do that, but anyway, revisions seem to be a big deal for you guys. So,
what'd they say to your friend?
Oh my God, furious. But at a certain point, I mean, I should add that the icon was less than a half inch in size. It was just an icon for a header in a magazine.
Yeah.
Just like a little newsletter magazine ad, kind of little booklet or whatever. It's just ridiculous to spend that much time on it. And at that point, you're working for free. My friend's hourly rate dropped. I'm not very good at telling stories about my friend. I need to change the tenses.
It was Blanco.
Yeah, it was Antonio Blanco.
Antonio Blanco.
This was years ago, by the way. And so I hadn't learned some of the stuff that we're talking about and how to present your work to limit the revisions. I think what Will said is really valid, is just think about this from a client's perspective, that if you just send a JPEG of your sketch, no notes, no anything, the client is free to interpret that anyway. Maybe they think something in the background is one thing, you think it's something different, or whatever. There's a lot of miscommunication, and I could have definitely, that was very early in my career, I could have presented probably different and gotten through it, or asked better questions in the beginning. So getting that scope right involves asking questions. It involves interviewing your client, which we talked about a second ago. In the beginning, you just want to say, okay, I'll do the job. I don't want them to think I don't know what I'm doing. But now I asked a lot of questions, and I'll even say, hey, I'm confused about this part, or whatever. I think you can be more honest with your clients than you think as an illustrator.
Yep. I think that's really good advice, is to be that person that is not afraid to look stupid with the questions. And the thing is the irony there is you actually look smart when you ask a lot of questions. You know, when you try to nail down exactly what things are going on, and you could even just say, I even like give the advice to be incredibly honest. Like, hey, this is my second illustration job. I'm still new at this. So can you just answer this? Like, you know, am I allowed to do it? You know, this sort of thing. Does this contract allow that? I've read through it, but I don't quite understand this part. And usually people, you know, the publishing industry is so small that word gets around so easily. No one's going to take advantage. It's hard to basically you hear about the jerks pretty quick. Is what I'm trying to say.
And they're usually smaller clients.
Yeah,
that's true. Yep. Yeah. So make sure your scope and what the project is outlined very clearly. If it starts to change, bring it up early and try to just be clear and honest with your client. That is kind of the takeaway there. How much, so this is the payment, how much you're going to be paid and how you will be paid. And I guess royalties go along with that. This seems like a no-brainer. Oh, you're going to get paid $2,000. How's that going to be broken up? If you're doing books like Jake, Will, and I, it's typically broken up into 3. Lately, I've seen them start to be broken up into 2. You get a payment right when you start, and then a payment. I think this last one I did is so I got a payment when I started, and then a payment when I was done, and that was it. Like there was no interim, and it lasted a year, so it was really problematic. And that's where that comes into play, like how often you're paid. If it's a big project, there's a ton of stuff that goes with all this stuff, how much you're paid and the royalty structures and all that stuff. You guys have any stories you want to tell there, or you want me to dive into one?
As far as payment is concerned, the only time I've really had confusion there, and usually because I haven't paid close attention, I'll get a surprise check that I didn't expect.
Hey, that's the good side of that.
Right. But usually, and my agent stays pretty much on top of this, but you just want to be aware if you need to pay your agent or if the money is the publisher is paying your agent separately, you know.
True.
So you just want to make sure that when you get that money, if it is all yours or if it is, you know, if there's a percentage that you owe the person you're working with.
Right.
I've been really lucky. I've never really had surprises. I think one time I didn't read the contract, like you said, Jake, and my payments were broken up into 4: signing, a quarter on signing, a quarter on completed of sketches, and a quarter on finished artwork turned in, and then a quarter on the publication. So I had to
That's
wait
a new
like
one.
another year. Yeah.
Yeah, they started doing that about like 8 years ago or something, where, like Will said, you get paid after publication, but the publication can be how long after you turn in the work?
It's a long time. The nice thing is, you know, you've got this money that's out there that's coming in. But if you're not good with money, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you just want to know how it's broken up so you can plan for it. You know, going back to my student who did that work for the game company, you don't want all your eggs to be in one basket at the end of a project. There's never a time where you're more useless than after the work has been turned in.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It's the hardest time to get paid when the project's already done, your work is done. Now you're saying, hey, you owe me $20,000 because I did all this stuff. It's hard to get paid at that point. So my advice is get incremental payments. If the project starts to get big and your client doesn't suggest it, you're asset-based, like you're in entertainment or whatever, concept development, get incremental payments and get a payment up front if it's a new client. And then pay attention to the structure of how you're paid. If you're just doing an editorial illustration, it's just straight money. But as you know, it's $1,500 and you do this cover and in one interior spot. It's very clear. If you're doing books and other things where you're creating a narrative content, there's a lot of stuff to think about. Royalties included, and all the stuff we were talking about in the beginning, the rights and like how if it gets turned into a play or whatever, how does that look and what happens there? There's one thing I want to point out in publishing specifically, and that is the nature of net royalties versus your list royalties. And the difference there is if you say you're an illustrator and you're going to get 10% per book sold, is it a straight 10%? That's what, going into publishing, that's what I would say. Okay, a book costs $10. That means, and I get 10%. That means I get $1 from every book, right? That's just the easy math. Well, I had done 4 or 5 books, and then I got a new offer, and I'm perusing the contract, and it says percent. But the word after what the percent is said net profits, and or net sales, rather, not list sales, but net. And so I asked my agent, what does that mean? Well, that little differentiation between the word net or list can cost you thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. The difference is, net is how much money did the book make after all the costs are taken into account.
And that's where you get into creative accounting.
Yeah. I mean, they don't have to list what the expenses are, where the expenses came from. What if you're paying for another book that had poor sales? Or I mean, I have no idea what goes into that. But it can take what would have been $1 royalty and turn it into a penny.
So then the question really is, are you successful at getting a publisher to move from net to gross? I mean, can you just say, no, I want gross? They say, well, no, it's on net. And then what do you do?
Yeah, you're stuck. And that's where you just got to go in eyes wide open. If you have no books, maybe you got to kind of suck it up and do a book that gets published where you're not going to make some big back end money on the royalties because it's set to net versus list. I want any of you guys who have done a book already, go check your contract and see what it says right after the percent. I asked my agent about that, and I even mentioned it to my client. This was funny. The client my art director had no idea that word was even in there, that was a distinction, because it used to all be on list price. That's only new within the last 15 years that it switched to net. Mm-hmm. So that little word took so much income away from illustrators. So a lot of smaller publishers have switched to net, and even some of the big ones, but the main 5 are still doing list. And so that's why if you're going to shop a book around, I say shop it to the big ones, because they haven't shifted over to this form of price structure.
Yet.
Once they know that illustrators will really take anything. I mean, we have a starving artist mentality. We talked about that on one of the other podcasts. If they know that we can do it and we won't even pay attention to it, then they will. And so I think that's why it's important to say this out loud and be collective. It's weird talking about money and contracts and stuff that we just don't want to talk about it out loud. But then stuff like this happens. So you just got to be really careful. I'll tell you another little line item story with pricing and all that stuff. A couple of years back, I guess this is more than a couple of years back now at this point, but I had done about, say, 10 books or whatever. And I'd done a book, and it was a couple of years old, or maybe a year or 2 old. And all of a sudden I started getting people sending me email. I wake up one day and start getting these emails saying, hey, got your book in the mail. This book is so cool. And more than 20 emails all of a sudden in one morning. I was like, what is happening?
Whoa.
Well, the Dolly Parton, country singer, has a reading program that started out being local, then national, then international, where it's a reading program where books go out to underprivileged kids and all these different lists of kids. I don't know the whole scope of that reading program, but it's huge. And somehow, just randomly, she had picked my book. And so a bunch of people got my book worldwide all of a sudden in one day. So I'm getting all these emails or whatever.
That's awesome.
And so immediately I'm running to my contract to see, do I get the Mercedes or do I go a little higher end? Because it was thousands of books, right?
Am I going to get a Carrera or the 911?
Right.
What?
Yeah, exactly. And so once I check it, it's all broken down. The original illustration job is X number of dollars and my royalty rate. But then it's broken down even further. If it goes to a book club, you get this. If it goes to this kind of club, you get this. If it's remaindered, you get this. And so going down to my percentage dropped from 10% down to 0.00010%
Yep.
if it goes to a book club like this. And so I really didn't. Maybe I made $50 or something. It did not change me.
And the reason being is because they're buying in bulk. They're
huge numbers.
They're buying 20,000 copies at a time, and so
Correct.
It's so dumb. You should still get This
don't
just
like
frustrates me.
It just drops so significantly from, I just feel like in most contracts, the illustrator gets the brunt of this stuff. I mean, I know there's costs and stuff. I don't want to put it all on the publisher and say they're trying to do that. But I just feel like for the work we do and for how visible the product that we're offering is, we kind of get hammered in a way.
So should we try our illustrator, what's it called? Where we pick it out front of all the strike, an illustration strike.
I think we should. I think that strike is called Kickstarter. Well, I mean, it's true because I mean, all of a sudden you see thousands of books going out, and then all of a sudden you're not compensated for it. So you just want to be aware if your book gets picked for something like that. You know, Scholastic has their reading program in schools. You know, my kid gets those little order forms or whatever, and you fill them out, and the books come 6 weeks later. You know, how much does the illustrator get from that? You just want to go in aware of what happens there.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah. I know, like the Scholastic book fairs, it's a significant, it's like 6% versus 10% or even 4%, depending on what it is. So
you got to think if it's, and it could be 4% of net, because that doesn't change based on that. The net sets up all the rest of the pricing structures. I'm sure people are loving this.
I know.
I feel so geeky on this stuff, but hopefully this is interesting because it makes a difference on how much you make.
This is the stuff that is hard to find answers to. It really is. And I remember calling my mentors when I first started as an illustrator to get answers to these questions. There was no podcast to listen to.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is all
real
stuff
deal.
they don't teach you in art school.
Yeah.
If only there's a book that kind of went into this.
Oh, that's good. I do think this stuff's important. So hopefully I think people think it's interesting. So the next item up for dibs is ownership. Who owns the work and the rights, and how can they use it? So that's kind of the nature that my mall story that I originally gave to start off the podcast comes under. What happens then, and who owns the rights to it, and can you use it again? So that's why we always fight if you listen to SVS and our classes or whatever, we fight for keeping your rights as an illustrator. Would you guys ever recommend doing work for hire? And if so, what would those circumstances be?
How about it, Will?
Sorry, I'm answering an emergency email here.
Would I ever do work for
Can't answer
hire?
emails during my topic.
I'm sorry, man. You were going so good without me.
All right, I'm going to keep going then.
What would you do? What would you do, Lee?
I say do not do work for hire unless you're doing it specifically for a reason and it's an end-use thing. Don't just say I'm going to be work for hire, by the way, for those of you not familiar with that term, is where a company buys literally all rights and the copyright from you. It's not just that they can use it however they want to. It's they actually now own the illustration. You're not attached to it in any way.
But Lee, you're not being true to yourself here.
What?
Okay, so here I'm the client.
Okay.
And I want you to do 5 illustrations for a textbook story. Okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to give you $10,000 and it's a work for hire. You going to do it?
Again, it has to be a limited scope. So maybe I would do it, but I would say I'm going to go in, I'm going to get the money from this, and I'm going to then target my intended target audience to being the group that doesn't do that. So you do educational for a short time frame, or it gives you some kind of exposure that you wouldn't have had otherwise. I'll give you an example of that. I just did a cricket cover. They don't buy it. It's not work for hire. I still do maintain the rights for it, but there's some other parameter. They get more rights than I give to normal other clients. But the reason is they give me total creative freedom, and I like working for them. It's just a cover. I get to test out different techniques, and I go in knowing that it's a one-off. You know what I mean? That's not like, a lot of times educational is a trap. A lot of educational clients pay work for hire where they take all the rights. And once you're in, man, they just want somebody to illustrate it. It kind of doesn't matter about your illustration style. They need people to do these stories and these manuscripts and all that stuff. And you can get stuck there. And so
but
that's
what
the
if
big
you
thing.
want the money?
As long as you know that's what you're in for.
Yeah.
It's short-term money. There's nothing wrong with
It's
that.
short term. The thing is, I guess the point I was trying to make is there's a point at which it's worth it. I mean, if somebody was going to pay you 20 or 30,000 for those same 5 illustrations,
I think there's definitely other factors at play besides the money for wanting to take a job, and that would be, does this get you in contact with certain people that you want to work with?
Right.
So you might take less money if it means that this could essentially you become friends with or working friends with certain people. Does it give you the kind of exposure that you aren't having? So it might be like a cover of a magazine.
Right.
It may not pay as well, but it means you could just say, yeah, I was on the cover, or I worked for this particular company. And does it allow you a certain creative freedom or boost your or help you master your craft a little bit better?
Right.
Like, you've never done this kind of project before. You're getting paid to do it. So maybe you take it on because now you'll have the excuse to work on something like that, to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you just described the Cricut cover to a T. Like it's all those things. Like, they let me do what I want. It's very playful. They don't have a lot of artistic feedback. I just get to kind of do what I want. Now, the downside, I'll tell you what the ownership problem is in terms of the rights, is the one line item that I don't like is they can use it again, reuse the illustration without me getting paid. I hate that. And sometimes a cover will come out. I get a couple of emails saying, "Hey, I just got your Spider Ladybug Cricut magazine in the mail. I love the cover." And I'm like, "What? I didn't even know that they reprinted it." And I don't get anything.
Oh, yeah.
I still own the copyright though, so I can still sell prints and things like that, which I do.
You get fame.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of it. Yeah, it's a good deal all the way. It's a good deal for them. It's a good deal for me.
I'm going to advocate for the person who just needs money. I mean, sometimes I've been in that situation where you've got bills, you're worried that you're not going to make rent, you're not going to pay your electric bill, whatever.
Right. Yeah, I have no problem with that.
That's the only thing you're thinking of is here's an offer, and it pays $500, or it pays $1,000, or it pays $2,000, and it's work for hire.
Well, I'm going to add the asterisk though. I want to add the asterisk that it needs to be a temporary fix to a problem, and that's fine. Needing money is a definite need that everybody has. The problem is when clients keep the work for hire contracts, it starts to bring down the industry as a whole. If they can keep all the rights, they will. I'll tell you this technique that I learned from David Hone when we shared a studio. It was awesome. Client calls asking for all rights. David gives them, and I'm just kind of paraphrasing a bunch of different jobs that I saw him do, but he'd give them a price list. Like, here's this illustration if you just wanted to use it one time. And let's just say it's $250. And here's if you wanted to use it for 6 months, and it's $700. And here's if you want to use it for 2 years. And it goes all the way up to, by the end, it's like, here's what you get if you want all the rights to it, including the copyright. It's now $10 billion. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? It goes up, and the client says, well, you know what? Maybe we don't need all the rights to it. Why do we need all the rights to it? If it's going to be a one-time use for them, and then they can scale back. And I've seen him do that successfully, and it kind of...
I do really like that, the kind of noble illustrator, which is what I'll call that, which is, the illustrators partnership was kind of in that vein of taking responsibility for the industry as a whole, caretaking. I do that. I lost a job the other day that I overbid. And I think I feel good about myself because I feel like there's someone out there that's going to benefit from the fact that I'm pushing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if we're all just taking whatever's offered, we're just lowering.
Correct. The client learns that they can just ask for whatever,
right? Because
there's always somebody who'll take it. You need to be able to say no.
On the flip side, though, I would say I really don't. I do not like illustrators that try to put that responsibility on the up and comers. I
know it puts them in a terrible position.
I think that's unfair to have someone who's a veteran illustrator who obviously they want prices pushed up for themselves,
right?
And they will shame the up and comers for taking on work for hires because it hurts them.
Yeah.
No. When you're starting out, you have to look out for yourself.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, I am looking out for that younger illustrator. I'm trying to help them not make the same mistakes I did, not take on a work for hire that's not good for them long term. Hey, they got to pay bills now.
Yeah. I just want them to go in eyes wide open.
Right.
On
and I
what
agree
that
with
means. I mean, that's all. I mean, everybody's done jobs. Remember I told you there, I did an illustration of a tooth riding a motorcycle. I mean, that was straight up work for hire, terrible illustration, not very well executed. But I needed the money. I mean, in the exact situation like you're talking about, that's what was offered to me at the time. I did not have covers being offered to me or book deals or whatever. And you know what I mean? I had to do that. And everybody is, has that period of their life.
If people could see the things that I had to do early on, they'd stop listening to this podcast.
Yeah, we've all done. Yeah. We've all done really weird stuff.
We should have a gallery. If you guys can find that, we should have a gallery.
I've burned most of it. It's so embarrassing.
So I've got a great story from David about usage. And so the usage one is one I want you guys to pay, as listeners, to pay particular attention to. And like I said, go in with eyes wide open. So David did this book. This one's a bizarre one, but just shows you how weird stuff can get. He was contacted by a publisher to work on a new book series. The main character had already been established in some other kind of jobs, but not a book, right? So the main character, say it's an inventor, I think, or something like that. Old inventor is what David said. Has already been established. There's like 3 or 4 main characters or whatever in the book series, but that one is already done. So David has to kind of hit that style, but then he invents the other ones. They like it, he does the book. It's a series. He does book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. I mean, this book series is so long. I respect David so much because he was able to do good work, even towards book 20. I would have been saying, get me out of here at that point. Well, all of a sudden, after book, 20, a huge series, the client said that they wanted to pay him less. And the book series is successful. So David says, no, I think if anything, you should be paying me a little bit more because the book's done well and the quality's high and people are interested in it. Well, the client decides to go to another illustrator. And David has come up with all 3 or 4 of these characters. So what would you guys do in that situation? They're just going to get another illustrator to do it.
Yeah. I mean, he's kind of stuck, I guess, if he hasn't, if there's no sort of clause like that in the contract that he has any sort of ownership for it.
Well, that's exactly, that's what happened. He runs to the contract. This is what happens in these crazy things. You run to your little file that you haven't opened in 5 years. And he pulls it out. And sure enough, there's a line item that the publisher owns the characters. So they had so all of a sudden a new illustrator's doing the series. Then the new illustrator didn't actually end up using his characters anyway. They sort of redesigned them in their own way or whatever. So it became a non-issue, but I thought it was really interesting that if he maintained the ownership of the characters and they switch illustrators, all of a sudden it could be a huge payday for the artist.
Yeah.
But what a weird one, right?
Yeah.
I've never heard of anything like that.
Me either.
So bizarre. Let's check time here. We're going long. Let's bail. So that's usage, details when things go wrong. One last thing I wanted to put in there: first right of refusal. Do you guys get that clause ever?
Yes, that is definitely something that I've dealt with in the past, and that basically is if you do, I guess it works on either side. Like if you did a children's book with this particular character and they want to do book 2, they need to contact you to see if you want to be the artist to do for book 2. Like you have first right of refusal. Vice versa, if you have a character that you've created and you do a graphic novel with this company and you want to go on and do a second graphic novel, or you did a series and you want to do a second series, that publisher might say, well, we want first right of refusal to see if we want to do the second series with you. And so I think it's good, it's fair, it's something that I think plays well for both parties.
Yep. Yeah, I wouldn't have any problem with that clause. I did get a couple people write about that particular clause that they felt locked in from it. But I say go for it. That just means you got a publisher who wants to invest in you, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, that's just some of the things that you guys can pay attention to in your contracts. Hopefully, we have illuminated some highlights for contract stuff.
It's good stuff. It's good to talk about these kinds of things, and over time, the best teacher, I think, is when you make a mistake.
Yeah,
because you don't forget these stories. I mean, we're battle tested in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
that's right.
Very true. All right, Jake, you want to take us out?
I'm going to take us out. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the 3-Point Perspective podcast. This podcast is made possible by SVSLearn.com. And if you haven't checked that out yet, do go over to SVSLearn.com and see what we have to offer, what's going on there. It's just been such a great community. Lots of good learning happening, lots of good conversation happening on the forums. The forums are free to join, so check that out. There's actually a podcast or a thread about this particular podcast where you can ask questions about contracts, see what other people's experiences are, and take issue with something that we said as well. And I'm sure there's plenty of things to take issue in this episode. That's for sure. Your hosts today have been Will Terry, Lee White, and Jake Parker. Will Terry can be found at willterry.com. And you can follow him on Instagram at willterryart. Lee White can be found at leewhiteillustration.com and on Instagram at leewhiteillo. And I'm Jake Parker. My website's mrjakeparker.com. And I'm on Instagram at Jake Parker. Podcast is produced by Aaron Painter. Sorry, my mouth is getting dry. I had to take a drink.
Couldn't last for one more minute.
Nope. Podcast produced by Aaron Painter. Go check out his work, painterdraws.com. Podcast edited by Alex Sugg. That's Alex Sugg with 2 Gs.com. And podcast video is edited by Daniel 2. And you could find his work at daniel2.co. That's tu.co. Podcast shared online and all of our social media for SVS Learn is done by Lisa Fott. Thank you, Lisa, for that. All right, that's all. We'll see you guys next time.